The conference room smelled like someone's anxiety. I noticed it before I noticed anything else. That specific chemical scent of a room full of people trying to project calm. It lives in the air conditioning somehow. Recirculated tension. I set my coffee on the table without sitting down. I had learned years ago that the person who sits first loses the early seconds of a room. Small thing. But in the kind of meeting I had been summoned to, there were no small things. Dorian sat across from me. He had a folder in front of him, which was theatrical. Everything relevant to this meeting existed in emails that he'd had legal draft 2 weeks ago, and I'd already read them twice. But he needed the folder. He needed the performance of it. Beside him sat our general counsel, Patricia Voss, who had the specific expression of someone being paid to be in a room she finds distasteful. Patricia was good at her job. She had always been good at her job. Today, her job was something she was clearly not enjoying. And beside Patricia sat Delphine. Delphine, who had walked into Asheville Creative Group 8 months ago as an external consultant, carrying a leather portfolio and a smile calibrated for first impressions. Delphine, who had been in my husband's ear for 6 of those 8 months, though I had known about it for 7. I sat down. "Mara?" Dorian began, and the way he said my name, that measured care, that particular weight, told me he had practiced this opening, possibly in a mirror, possibly with Delphine. "I've read the letter," I said, "and the addendum, and the NDA draft that Patricia's office sent over on Thursday. Yeah, which has 3 clauses I'm not signing in their current form." Patricia wrote something down. Dorian recalibrated. "We hope to discuss." "I know what you hope to discuss." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. The ceramic was warm enough to think clearly against. "You want me to resign the COO position, accept the severance as structured, and sign a non-compete and non-disparagement agreement that would prevent me from working in the creative consulting sector for 18 months. I paused. "You've also included a clause prohibiting me from soliciting or accepting business from any current Asheville client for 24 months, which is unenforceable in this jurisdiction, but I appreciate that Patricia included it with a straight face." Patricia did not look up from her notepad. Delphine shifted in her seat, and I had not looked at her directly yet. I was not going to, not because I couldn't, but because looking at her would have suggested she warranted my attention in the context of this meeting. She did not. This meeting was between me and the decision I'd already made, and Delphine was furniture. "The situation has evolved," Dorian said. He had a tone he used when he wanted to sound above the conversation. "The board feels that a leadership transition—" "Dorian." I said his name the way you'd set something heavy down on a hard surface. "The board is 3 people, 2 of whom you appointed. I helped structure those appointments. I know how this works." A pause that went on 2 beats too long. "What are your terms?" Patricia asked. She was the only professional in the room, and she knew this conversation was taking too long. I had prepared for this question the way you'd prepare for a licensing exam. Completely, methodically, with no performance anxiety, because I had done the work. "I'll sign the resignation effective in 30 days, not immediately as drafted. The severance increases by 15%. The non-compete radius narrows to direct client services and does not include advisory work, which I'll define specifically in an addendum I'll send by end of week. The non-solicitation clause drops to 12 months and applies only to clients with an active contract on the date of my departure, not prospective or lapsed clients." I lifted my coffee. "The NDA as written stays. I have no interest in talking about this company's internal dynamics to anyone." Dorian looked at me like he was trying to read something in my expression. But he had been doing that for years. He had never gotten very good at it. "We'll need to review," he started. "Of course." I stood. "Take the week. I'll start the transition documentation in the meantime. There's a significant amount of institutional knowledge that will need to be transferred." I picked up my coffee. It would be a shame for any of it to fall through the cracks. I walked out of the conference room before anyone could say anything else. The hallway smelled like coffee and printer toner and the low-grade stress of a Tuesday morning in March. I walked back to my office, closed the door, sat at my desk, and opened the spreadsheet I had been building for 11 weeks. I had titled the tab, deliberately, Transition Notes. What it actually was, a complete map of everything Asheville Creative Group did not know it needed me to know. Actually, let me explain what I mean by that. I had been COO of Asheville for 6 years. Before that, Director of Operations for 3. Before that, Account Director. I had come in when the company was a boutique branding shop with 8 employees, a founder with a vision, and no operational infrastructure whatsoever. The operational infrastructure was me. Not in the way founders say that about themselves in interview profiles. I mean it in the literal sense. I built the vendor relationships, negotiated the client contracts, designed the reporting structure, wrote the employee handbook, and was the only person in the building who understood how all the moving pieces actually fit together and which ones required watching. Dorian was the face. Dorian had the relationships, the instinct for a room, almost the ability to make clients feel like they were in capable and elegant hands. He was genuinely good at that. I had admired it when we met, and I had kept admiring it for longer than I should have, because genuine talent is hard to stop respecting, even when the person holding it is doing things that warrant very little respect. But Asheville's ability to deliver on what Dorian sold, that was architecture I had built. And as I sat in my office that Tuesday morning, I understood something I had known intellectually for months, but only felt clearly now. They were about to trade the architect for someone who had never built anything. I did not feel what I expected to feel. Not grief, not rage, something closer to the feeling before a thunderstorm, when the air pressure shifts and everything goes very quiet and still. I opened the spreadsheet and started a new column. To understand what I had built over those 11 weeks, you have to understand how I had gotten there. Not the broad arc of it, but the specific morning. I had started documenting in January, the week after I found the thread of texts on Dorian's phone. I hadn't gone looking for them. He'd left his phone on the kitchen island, face up, when he went upstairs to get something, and a message from a contact, listed only as D, came through with enough visible text that I understood the shape of what was happening before I'd even touched the screen. I had stood in my kitchen for about 30 seconds. Then I went and got my own phone, opened a note, and started writing down what I knew and what I needed to find out. I knew Delphine had been at the company for 2 months. I knew she had been brought in through a consulting contact of Dorian's from his previous life before Asheville, which I had always found vaguely inexact as a vetting process, but had not pressed on. I knew she had been given an undefined senior advisory role that had been described to me as temporary, a project-by-project engagement to help evaluate some strategic positioning questions. I had not objected at the time. I had noted that the strategic positioning questions were things I was fully capable of evaluating, and that the budget for her engagement was coming out of a discretionary line that I didn't control, and I had filed it in the category of things that were Dorian's choices to make. I had been wrong about the category. Over January and February, I watched the consulting engagement become something else. I watched Delphine attend meetings she had not originally been invited to. I watched her begin to have opinions about operational decisions that were outside any reasonable scope of strategic advisory work. I watched the way her opinions landed with Dorian, that particular attentiveness, that leaning in, and I understood that the opinions were not the point. The presence was the point. And I understood something else. The board, all 3 of them, 2 of whom owed their positions partly to my advocacy, had begun meeting with Delphine one-on-one. I found this out because our executive assistant, Carla, had a habit of keeping the master calendar clean and organized, and occasionally telling me things she observed without editorializing, because she had excellent professional judgment about what I needed to know. Delphine met with Marcus Aldridge last Thursday, she said to me one morning in February, setting a document on my desk. Marcus Aldridge was a board member and Dorian's college roommate. And with Caroline Hughes on Tuesday. Thank you, I said. The meetings weren't on the main calendar, Carla said. I know, I said. Thank you. Carla left. I sat at my desk and looked at the window for about 90 seconds. Then I opened the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet had 4 main sections, and I had built each of them with the specific care of someone who understands that the thing they are building will only work if it is accurate. The first section was what I called the client architecture. This was a document mapping every significant client relationship at Asheville, all including the actual person at each company who considered me their real point of contact, as opposed to Dorian or whoever the assigned account manager was on paper. That was a different list than the one on the org chart. On paper, accounts were managed by account directors who reported to me. In practice, every significant client in the portfolio had at some point had a difficult moment. A deliverable that went sideways, a campaign that needed to be rebuilt, a budget conversation that required someone senior enough to resolve. And in every one of those moments, it had been me who flew to the meeting, or got on the call, or stayed late to rewrite the brief. You don't build those moments. They happen, but they leave residue. The residue in this case was 11 names. 11 individuals at 9 companies, names who had my personal email and my personal cell number, and who called me directly, not the main line, when something needed to be resolved at speed. That list was what the company thought it owned. It did not. The second section was the contract landscape. This was the most detailed part, and it had taken the longest because it required me to read through 6 years of contracts in a way I had not revisited them since they were signed. What I was looking for were the anomalies, the clauses that only mattered in specific circumstances that hadn't happened yet. The one that interested me most was the Hartley contract. Hartley & Associates was our largest client, a mid-sized financial advisory firm with a 12-year-old rebrand problem and a CEO who had finally, 3 years ago, decided to fix it. I news they paid Asheville $900,000 a year for ongoing brand strategy, communication support, and campaign work. They were 40% of revenue. I had personally won the Hartley account. I had flown to their offices 3 times before they signed. I had spent 11 days on their initial rebrand, sleeping in a hotel 2 blocks from their building, eating bad room service, rewriting the brand guidelines document at 2 in the morning. Their CEO, a man named Leonard, who wore the same style of loafers in 3 different colors and had an extremely reliable instinct for when he was being sold something versus when he was being served something, had said to me once, "Mara, if you ever leave that firm, we go with you." He had meant it as a compliment. He had no idea what it would become, but the compliment was also, almost contractually, almost literally true. In the Hartley Agreement, which I had helped draft, which I knew the way you know a document you've lived inside for 3 years, there was a key person clause, standard for service agreements at this level. It specified that the named account lead, which was me by title and by description, was material to Hartley's decision to engage Asheville. In the event of that account lead's departure from the firm, Hartley retained the right to exit the contract with 60 days' notice and no penalty. No one else at Asheville had read this clause closely in 3 years. It existed in a database our legal assistant maintained, technically visible to anyone who looked. But no one had looked, because the circumstances that would make it relevant had never seemed likely, until now. And I did not plan to tell the board about this clause when the transition conversations began. I was not legally obligated to. The contract existed in their own system. They had counsel. I was not responsible for other people's due diligence. The third section was the operational calendar. This was a record of every time-sensitive operational task at Asheville that had no formal owner other than me because I had absorbed it over the years into the category of things I simply did. The way a person who has lived in a house long enough knows which door sticks in humidity and compensates without thinking about it. The most important item on that list was the Pelham renewal window. Pelham was our primary production vendor, the firm that handled all physical production for client campaigns. Printing, fabrication, installation, logistics. We had worked with them for 5 years. The relationship was good, partly because I had cultivated it personally, and partly because of a favorable rate structure I had negotiated in year 2 that locked in pricing 22% below their market rate. That rate lock had a renewal mechanism. Every year, in a 60-day window that opened in April, Asheville was entitled to renegotiate and extend the rate lock for another 12 months. If the window was missed, rates reverted to Pelham's current market pricing automatically, without notice, on the first day of the new contract year. Current market pricing, as of the last time I had checked, ran 38% above what we were paying. The window opened in 6 weeks from the day I was handed the resignation terms. I made a note in the operational calendar, timestamped it, and did not add Pelham's contact information to the transition documentation. The fourth section was the people architecture. This was my notes on every person at Asheville whose departure would significantly damage operations, alongside what I knew about what was keeping them there. The most important entry was Gideon. Gideon was our chief technology officer, and he was, without any exaggeration, the reason our digital client work functioned at all. He had rebuilt our entire project management and client portal infrastructure over 3 years, starting from a patchwork of legacy tools that had nearly cost us the Hartley account in year 1 when the client portal went down during a campaign review. He was precise, opinionated about the right things, and deeply uninterested in corporate theater of any kind. He was paid well. Not as well as he could have been at a larger firm, and he knew it. He stayed because of a combination of things: genuine interest in the scale of problems he was solving here, the flexibility I had always given him over his own project assignments, and a retention structure I had designed specifically for him 2 years ago. The structure worked as follows. Instead of a lump sum retention bonus with a cliff vesting date, which Gideon had once described to me as making him feel like a dog on a leash, and which I had taken seriously, I had built a quarterly project allocation review. Every 3 months, his preferred client assignments were formally confirmed or adjusted, and this was tied to a quarterly supplemental payment that vested immediately on confirmation. Opposite meant Gideon had a conversation every 3 months that affirmed he was valued and gave him meaningful input into his own workload. It cost the company approximately $12,000 per quarter. I ran that review, I scheduled it, I confirmed the allocations, I processed the supplemental in coordination with payroll. No one else at Asheville knew this structure existed in this specific form. It was not in the main HR system. It lived in a side letter filed in a subfolder in our legal drive that only I and Patricia had permissions to access. After my last day, I scheduled a task: remove my own access to that folder. I want to be precise about what I was doing because precision matters here. I was not sabotaging anything. I did not corrupt files, I did not cancel contracts early or create problems that did not already exist. I did not breach any fiduciary duty I held while I was still employed. Every action I took in those 11 weeks was legal, and every piece of information I documented had been legitimately created or acquired in my role. What I was doing was more specific than sabotage. I was declining to compensate for institutional memory gaps that the company had created by choosing to push me out. That is a different thing entirely. It is a distinction I want you to understand clearly. The company had a right to remove me. I had no obligation to protect them from the consequences of removing me. Those are two separate things that people often blur because we expect the person being removed to continue acting in the interests of the institution that has just discarded them. We especially expect this of women, who have been trained to manage the feelings and outcomes of people who have wronged them. I had decided quietly on a Tuesday night in January that I was not going to do that. By the end of March, I had accepted their revised terms. Patricia had pushed back on 2 of my counter proposals, and I had given ground on the timeline, agreeing to 21 days rather than 30, in exchange for the advisory work carve-out in the non-compete. The exact language which I had proposed and which Patricia had approved without, it appeared, thinking carefully enough about what I was likely to do next, was, "The restrictions herein shall not apply to independent advisory services provided in a personal capacity, provided such services are not rendered to current Asheville clients as defined in Section 4(c). Or Section 4(c) defined current clients as those with an active contract as of my departure date." I had drafted that language myself. In the note I sent Patricia, I had marked it as a minor clarification. The 21 days passed in a particular quality of silence. Dorian was professionally cordial. He checked in on the transition documentation, attended the briefing sessions I ran, and behaved the way someone behaves when they have accomplished what they wanted and are now focused on the next thing. The next thing, I gathered, was a dinner he and Delphine attended the Saturday after my departure was announced internally, at a restaurant I had introduced him to 4 years ago, on the occasion of his birthday, because he had mentioned once that he wanted to try it. And I knew about the dinner because Carla sent me a text that simply said, "Saw the booking in the system, thought you'd want to know. I'm putting in my notice on Friday." I replied, "Let me know when you do. I have a thought for you." Carla did put in her notice on Friday. And I did have a thought, specifically that she would be the first person I hired when I had something to hire her into. I spent the 21 days doing 3 things at once. The first was delivering exactly what I had promised in the transition. I wrote documentation, I ran briefings, I answered questions, I was thorough, professional, and this is the part that matters, completely accurate. I described every process I was handing off at the level of detail a competent professional could follow. I did not include anything I was not asked about. So I did not volunteer the context that would have allowed someone without my institutional knowledge to fill the gaps. There is a skill in knowing the difference between what you are being asked and what you would need to know to do the work well. I had that skill. I used it in those 21 days to answer only what I was asked. The second thing I was doing was registering a new entity. It was called Meridian Advisory Partners, and it had been incorporated 2 months earlier, in January, when I had understood that the direction of things was not going to change. I had filed the paperwork on a Saturday morning, alone in my home office, with black coffee and the particular calm of someone executing a plan they have thought through carefully enough that the execution doesn't require emotion. Meridian had a website, spare and professional, and without unnecessary words, built by a developer I had found through a personal referral and paid from a personal account. The site had been ready for 6 weeks. It sat at an address I had not shared with anyone at Asheville, accessible to anyone who searched my name. A service offering, a fee structure, a contact form. In the business development pipeline section of a project management tool I had set up on my personal laptop, I had 11 names, the same 11 from the client architecture spreadsheet. I had not contacted any of them while I was employed at Asheville. I would not. But I could not stop them from contacting me, should they choose to, once the departure announcement went out. And several of them already knew I was leaving because the internal announcement had gone company-wide. The third thing I was doing was noticing what the new leadership team was not doing. Delphine's official title, announced in the same communication as my resignation, was Interim Chief Operating Officer. The word interim had been her idea, I suspected. It softened the optics for the existing team, many of whom had been there long enough to have an opinion about the transition. It also gave her the flexibility to reshape the role before formally owning it, which was operationally smart. I could respect the move independently of everything else. She walked the floor 3 times in my 21 days. Each time she was warm, engaged, and entirely without apparent agenda, or so it appeared. She asked process questions, she took notes on a legal pad, she scheduled one-on-ones with every department head. What she did not do was ask me anything in depth. We had 2 joint meetings, both arranged by Patricia. In the first, I walked Delphine through the client portfolio at a summary level. She asked about revenue concentration and renewal schedules and client satisfaction data. Good questions. She had clearly prepared. In the second, I walked her through the vendor landscape at a similar level. Top 10 vendors by spend, relationship history, key contacts. She asked about lead times. She asked about payment terms. She asked which vendors we had tried and moved away from. She did not ask about the Pelham rate lock. She did not ask about the Hartley contract structure. She did not ask about Gideon's retention arrangement. I answered the questions she asked completely and accurately, closed my laptop, and went home. My last day was a Thursday. The team organized something small in the afternoon. The kind of quiet goodbye that people arrange when they are sad, but uncertain about the politics of showing it. There was a cake, there were speeches. Dorian gave one that was gracious and entirely detached, the performance of a man who has rehearsed his relationship to a situation until it no longer touches him. Gideon found me by the elevator near the end of the afternoon. He was a man who did not approach people unless he had something to say. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, with the expression of someone choosing words. "If you start something," he said, "I want to know about it." "That's good to know," I said. "I mean it. I've been here because of how things worked. If how things work changes," he stopped. "And I want to know before I make other decisions." "I'll be in touch," I said, and I meant it. I took the elevator down, walked through the lobby, stood on the pavement in the late afternoon light of the second week of April, cold still, the kind of cold that is retreating. The Pelham renewal window opened in 2 weeks. I went home and activated the Meridian website. The first week without an office had a specific texture. I woke at the same time every morning, made coffee, sat at my desk by 8. My home office was in a room that had always been a spare room, holding a guest bed and boxes I had never fully unpacked. In February, I had moved the boxes, removed the guest bed, and set the room up properly. A good chair, a desk that didn't wobble, all the kind of filing and organization that signals to yourself that you're serious about the space. The first 2 days, my phone was quiet. On the third day, Leonard called. He didn't call the Asheville main line. He called my personal cell, which he had had for 3 years. Leonard was a man who maintained relationships with people rather than institutions, and who had always been slightly ahead of the information curve in his industry because he paid attention to people when they left rooms, as well as when they arrived in them. "Mara," he said, "I got your note." I had sent Leonard a brief professional email on my last day at Asheville, advising him of my departure and introducing him to the account manager who would be taking over his account. The email was warm, appropriately formal, and completely unremarkable. It said nothing about Meridian. It said nothing about my next steps. If anyone at Asheville had reviewed it, and they might have, given the transition, it would have looked exactly like what it was meant to look like. But Leonard knew me. He had read it the way you write a careful message from someone who is telling you something between the lines. "What are you doing next?" he asked. "I've started an advisory practice. Independent, focused on strategic brand work at the senior relationship level." A pause. I heard him thinking. "When can we get coffee?" "Whenever works for you," I said. We had coffee the following Monday at a place near his office, which had good light and coffee that tasted like it came from somewhere that took the process seriously. I did not pitch him. I did not mention Asheville. So I did not volunteer anything about my departure terms. I described what Meridian was, in plain language, and where I was building toward. Leonard, who had run his firm for 20 years and had a very reliable sense of when someone was performing versus when they were simply being, listened for about 12 minutes and then said, "Send me your terms of engagement." "I'll have them to you by Thursday," I said. "Make it Friday. Give yourself the Thursday to tighten them." I did. Hartley's contract with Asheville had that 60-day exit clause, triggered by named account lead departure. Leonard had pulled the contract when I mentioned over coffee that I had co-drafted it and that his legal team might want to review it in the context of the leadership transition. He pulled it that afternoon. His lawyer called Asheville's legal office the following morning. I learned this not from anyone at Asheville. I had no contact with the firm per the departure terms, but from Carla, who had come to work for me by then, handling Meridian's operations with the same meticulous quiet she had brought to everything she did. She still had a friend in Asheville's project management team, a woman who kept her informed of the broad strokes of what was happening. Patricia apparently turned 3 shades of a color she didn't know she could turn, Carla told me. "That tracks," I said. The 60-day notice ran out in late June. Hartley's departure took Asheville from $900,000 in annual revenue from their largest client to 0. That was on its own a survivable shock for a firm with Asheville's overall revenue profile. Painful, requiring restructuring, but survivable with good management. The problem was that the shocks didn't arrive one at a time. I learned about the Pelham situation through a vendor contact of mine named Grace, who ran a logistics firm we had both done business with over the years. She mentioned it casually, in the context of a broader conversation about the production services market, not knowing the full picture. "I heard Pelham's rate negotiation with Asheville fell through," she said. "Something about a missed window." I asked what she knew. What she knew was that Pelham had sent their standard renewal notification to the contact on file at Asheville, which was me, in April.
"Oh, he'd be more like this."
It's giving small child that still believes in the American dream. The vocal fry disappeared with the Irish. Yeah, I don't know how to do the vocal fry and the, I don't know how to capture that little thing and the Irish accent. Mind blown. You didn't know he was a he? Of course he's a he. Cinderstrom. Welcome in and thank you. Wait, no dreamer, but I fucking love Brennan Lee Mulligan and I love him on Drop. Oh. How do ladies past 30 do kid voices better than any kid? I know, it's what we've been brought up with, I feel like. You're talking of the band. Okay, good. The star, is that what did it? I said, "Hey boy, sit in a tree. Mommy always wants you to come for tea. Don't be shy, straighten up your tie, get down from your tree house sitting in the sky." Of course, welcome, Cinder. Good to have you. World's best number. Oh my god, no. No. Oh, I fucking love. One time I was having tacos at my favorite taco spot. And I was there, at the table next to me was two adults and a little girl, and I couldn't see the guy's face. But then the woman who was sitting there was like talking about the girl and how cute she was, and she was like, turning around and looking at me and like smiling, meh, meh, meh. And the lady was like, oh, she's got like a plus 20 to charisma, and I was like, oh, these are my fucking people. Yeah, hell yeah. And oh no, this is Bo Burnham. He hates it. Armpit hates it. I'll skip Bo Burnham for you. I was like, oh yeah, these people are fucking talking in D&D terms. I love this. And then little girl kept being cute, and then the dad leaned